Welcome to our second Books at Baker. I'm Deb Wallace, the Executive Director of Baker Library. And, you know, I can't promise this is our second online session. And we did a pretty good job on the first one with Laura Wang, joined us to talk about her book, Edge, Turning Adversity into Edge. So we're very eager to try this out again with our dear friend, Hirotaka Takeuchi. We certainly missed the opportunity to welcome you to an Aldrich classroom, but actually moving has enabled us to open up participation. Our Global Research Center staff, many are joining us. Students are now scattered around the world. They can join us. Large number of people who are regularly not on campus, and we're delighted that you're able to join us. So it's been nearly 6 weeks since we've been working remotely, and we've been staring at this screen, and I don't know about you, but frankly, I find it kind of exhausting. But I promise you that this next hour is not going to be exhausting at all. In fact, it's going to be incredibly invigorating. Before I turn to Hiro to talk to us about his new book, just want to walk you through the program. We're going to take about 20-25 minutes where Hiro will talk about his work, and then we'll open it up for questions. And you can put your questions in through chat, which I will moderate for you. We're going to keep all the mics muted so that there's not a lot of extraneous noise. So I'd like to introduce Professor Hirotaka Takeuchi. Given he's so well known to so many of you, an introduction hardly seems necessary. I'd rather spend the majority of our time talking with him than talking about him. But it's probably noteworthy to just mention a few of the things he's doing at HBS, where he has continued to extend his seminal research with Professor Nonaka, the two fathers of the whole field of knowledge management. He's a member of the strategy unit, continues to write and teach about knowledge-based strategies. He's taking students yearly to study the crisis management approaches employed after the devastating earthquake and tsunami in Eastern Japan. And he teaches a course on microeconomics, the microeconomics of competitiveness with Professor Michael Porter. He's no stranger to the best dressed faculty list. He is a much loved member of the HBS community, and it's no wonder that he suggested we keep this time slot in the afternoon for our convenience, even though it is 4:30 on Wednesday morning for him in Tokyo. So Hiro, thank you again for being with us. Perhaps before you, just a little peek into what's life like in Tokyo. Over to you.
Life in Tokyo is not so bad. I've been here since January 1. I taught the immersive field course here in Tokyo, and I've been here since because of a lot of the restrictions for travel. I was supposed to be in Maui this week, but that's gone. So it's not bad. It's self-restraint. So, I can still walk around, I can still, go to places, but it is restrictive. But this is, the world we live in now.
Yeah, right.
So, am I on the screen right now?
All right, Mariah's going to share your slides right now.
Okay, so let's go with the slides. I'll do a little self-introduction using the slides, if that's okay. Okay, so that's the first slide. That's the title of the presentation today. Let me go to the second slide, the first slide, which is me back in those days teaching marketing. So next slide, please. Yep. You went too far. Let's back up. No, back up. Yep. There I am, 1976 to 83. This is teaching section G and H, the first year, so in 1976. So I was 29 years old then, and I got this fever of the case method. So I'm teaching marketing there. I used to have an office in Gallatin, and very fortunate that my neighbor in Gallatin was Mike Porter, and we shared a secretary for 7 years, from 76 to 83. And let me call you, that's called strategic positioning. For me, that was very helpful to be with him that time. And then I moved to Tokyo, next slide, and I worked with Jiro Nonaka, who's on your left here. And we've been kind of working on the knowledge management stuff. I ended up being the founding dean of the business school at Hitotsubashi, where Jiro and I used to work. I did come to Harvard to teach as a visiting professor in the AMP program, but I was there until 2010. And 2010, next slide, I came back to the Harvard Business School as a professor of management, and I've been here since. So I was supposed to retire this year, 2020, but Nitin basically said, hey, you don't have a successor. You got to wait until your successor is ready to take on your job as faculty chair for Japan. So Mike was the one who brought me back to the Harvard Business School. And as Deb mentioned, I used to teach MOC, microeconomics of competitiveness, and also taught a course on knowledge-based strategy. But the signature course for me is what used to be called IXP, Immersive Experience Program, now called IFC. So I take about 45 students to Tohoku, to Japan, and the theme the last 3 years has been the fusion of digital and analog. Until then, it was about Tohoku, the earthquake tsunami. I'll talk a little bit about that later. So let me turn to kind of the research I've been doing. Next slide. The book that Jiro and I have written 24 years ago is called The Knowledge Creating Company. So both Jiro and I graduated from UC Berkeley, MBA and PhD. So back then, our research was on data analysis. We did quite a bit of that. And then we moved on to information processing. Herbert Simon had an impact on us. So we did a lot of work on information processing. And then we went from data to information to knowledge. And this is a book we wrote 24 years ago with a lot of cases from Japanese companies. So the subtitle is How Japanese Companies Create the Dynamics of Innovation. So the key thing about this book, next slide, is the fact that we humans have both explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. And we focused on the latter, the tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is the tip of the iceberg. Tacit knowledge resides underwater. We got plenty of that. And the theory that we presented is called the psyche model, which is the next slide, which is converting tacit to explicit, explicit to tacit. So new knowledge is created if you convert one type of knowledge to the other. And also new knowledge is created by going from the individual to organizational knowledge creation. So knowledge resides in us, in humans. Peter Drucker said it best. He says it's the head and hand of every individual. The head is the explicit knowledge, which is digital, and the hand is the experience, which is the analog part. So converting two types of knowledge into each other creates new knowledge. That was the theory. The new book, which is the next slide, we now move from knowledge to wisdom. So we're now, the new book is called The Wise Company. It took us 24 years to write this book. And you know, what is wisdom? All you have to think about is mother's wisdom. So all of you have learned from your mother's wisdom. She probably said things ceaselessly, repeatedly. It's probably embedded in you. And the whole thesis of the new book is knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice. So we've gone from knowledge creation to knowledge practice, and that's the gist of the new book. And the next slide, we borrowed from Aristotle. So it took us 24 years, but we borrowed from Aristotle, who lived 2,400 years ago. So 100 times more than, you know, from the last book. And here are the three virtues that he talked about 2,400 years ago. We use the first two quite a bit in management, epistemology, technology, right? But the third one he postulated back then was phronesis. And our shorthand definition is know what should be done. So there's action, there's practice involved. And so we kind of use that phronesis, which in English is kind of known as practical wisdom, to create a revised model, which is the next slide. And as you can see, it has become three-dimensional. It has become dynamic. We have psyche, the SECI model, which is kind of the knowledge spiraling up from individual to organization up to the society level. So here, is it possible to convert back to me, Deborah? And I'd like to kind of do an exercise with the 100 of you, or maybe a little bit more, on what a spiral really means. And what I'd like you to do is kind of point your finger up towards the ceiling, right? Around your belly would be best, right? And if you could kind of, with the finger pointing up, create a little circle. Important thing is turn the circle clockwise. Can you do that, everybody? A little circle around your belly, right? With your finger pointing up, right? And then bring it up to your chest level with the circle a little larger. Bring it with still your finger pointing up, shoulder level, eye level. Make the circle a little bigger and up above your head. And now look at the circle. It's turning clockwise, correct?
Yeah.
No, it's turning the other way around, correct? So something happened dynamically where it was turning clockwise and all of a sudden you see it going the other way around. Now, in order to kind of understand the logic of that, you have to buy the book and read it. So let me turn back to the slide. But there's something mysterious about the spiral. So going back to the spiral, this is the new model that we created in the new book. I won't go through this because it'll take me about an hour to explain this. But the two important things, the time dimension is right in the middle. So we are now created a dynamic model rather than a static model. And now it's the ontological level has gone from the individual up to the organization to the society. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So from a strategy point of view, next slide, please. It now becomes kind of important to talk about the mission, vision, values, which basically comes from what we call an inside-out approach to strategy. You start with the beliefs, the ideals of the founder or the manager, and you talk about the vision, which is what kind of a future do I want to create? And you have your important values, your beliefs that support your strategy. I'll come back to this a little bit, but humans are at the center of knowledge creation and knowledge practice, especially knowledge practice. And we also think that the future should be an important part, future creation, making the future. Peter Drucker said it best: you cannot predict the future, but you can make the future, he said 50 years ago. And so we kind of follow that logic of trying to make future a stakeholder in addition to shareholder. And let me end with a case that we use at the start of the book. The next slide shows Soichiro Honda. And I don't know if you use the Honda case for those of you who are MBAs in the Strat first year course. But we talk about why Honda became so successful in motorcycles in the US. So there was Honda A, Honda B, if you recall that case. And this is, Honda back in those days when he was making motorcycles. But did you know that on the side of every Super Cub, the motorcycle, that any motorcycle that Honda makes is a logo, which is the next slide, of a wing. So Honda, from his early days, childhood days, always wanted to fly. That was his passion. He became a licensed pilot. His wife also became a pilot. He wanted to fly. And so human mobility was his thing, but it went from bicycles to motorcycles to cars, and eventually, the next slide, HondaJet. So this was created, developed, took him 29 years. Of course, he passed away before this the HondaJet was created, but this is the best-selling small jet in the United States right now. This is 3 years after it was developed. And, this kind of shows that it was Honda's dream to come up with a jet. And he always had the wing on all the motorcycles. And it took a young Honda employee by the name of Fujino to make this a reality. And this was developed in the US. While Honda Soichiro's dream was to fly this himself, Fujino's vision, what kind of a future do I want to create, was he basically, when we interviewed him, said, I want to make the life of American executives better. Instead of waiting at airports, instead of waiting for the plane to come, why not create an affordable, this costs $4.8 million, so he calls it affordable, a jet like this, which is fuel efficient. He basically said it's a combination of a Civic and an NSX, which is their sports car. It's sexy, and it's the best-selling jet in the United States right now. So let me stop there. If you can swing back to me. Are you still doing this or not? So that's kind of the part of my lecture. Let me stop there for a sec and maybe talk a little about the extension of what I'm doing with the book. I am now, because of coronavirus and being kind of pegged in my home, writing an article for the Harvard Business Review. It's called Humanizing Strategy. So I don't know how many of you have gone through the first year MBA course on strategy here. We still teach it in an outside-in approach, which is analyze the environment, analyze your competitor, but before that, analyze the industry. Remember 5 forces, right? Analyze the industry, analyze your competitor, and decide on your strategic positioning based on that, those analyses. So it's outside in. What we're saying in the new article is, well, strategy should also be inside out. Start from your beliefs, start from your ideals, and then try to create a future that is better than what it is now. And make sure that you're not only benefiting your shareholder, but society at large. So maximizing shareholder value is, what strategy is all about. We talk about SSP, superior sustainable profitability. Yes, that's all good, but in the new book, we're talking about the importance of common good for society. So we're trying to write a new article, which is called Humanizing Strategy. And we put a lot of evidence from neuroscience into it, because the brain, we're finding out, works quite a bit, in favor of what we're saying. It has an uncanny ability to deal with complexity. It always is changing. It's very good about thinking, imagining the future. So there's a lot of support coming from neuroscience into what we're doing, and we're putting humans at the center of strategy. So, when we talk about what's the origin of strategy, how do firms differ? In first year strategy, we said firms differ because they have a different value chain. So that was kind of the answer. We basically say, no, firms differ because they envision different futures. So humans can imagine, we can deal with complexity, we can sniff the wind. So that's kind of the basis of our new article. But it's based on recent findings in neuroscience. So look forward to that in 6 months or so. And we've also written an article on innovation, and we kind of split innovation into 3 stages. The first stage being 0 to 1, the second stage being 1 to 9, and the third stage being 9 to 10. And we kind of agree, most of the innovation, 1 to 9, is going to come through digital transformation. It's going to be the artificial intelligence. It's going to be IoT. It's also going to be AR. So all these things, the data analytics, the blockchain, all these things are going to create lots of innovation, 1 to 9. But from 0 to 1 and 9 to 10 is where humans excel. Because in the 0 to 1 stage, you have to have imagination, you have to have intuition, you have to have some gut feel. That's how new ideas come. And we still think that humans are better than machines in that area. In 9 to 10, it's more the sensitivity that humans have. It's kind of the analog thing that's good with humans. We have a good example of that. Let me use another Honda example, is Asimo. So they created this thing, a human robot, 25 years ago. The mission back then was to be able to beat the winning soccer team in 2050 in soccer with 11 Asimo robots playing against Barcelona or whoever, right? So that was the mission. But 4 years ago, they said, no, we're going to change the mission. They made the robot shorter. It's now 163 centimeters, which is like 5'7". They made the fingers much more nimble rather than the feet. It runs around 10 miles per hour right now. It can jump, it can do all kinds of things. But now it's more the fingers. Why? Because they want the robots to help the elderly. We take baths in Japan, right? So put them into the bath, take them out of the bath. So help them at home, mostly for the elderly. So they changed the vision. What kind of a future do we want to create into a society that would be kind to the elders? So that's the kind of thing that I think humans can think about. So it's actually the 9 to 10 part is the sensitivity part of understanding what's important in the world right now. Let me stop there. I've talked for 24 minutes straight, and you probably have questions to ask. And so at this point in time, I'm going to try to sip my first coffee of the morning. And maybe Deb, you want to start with a question?
Sure, I'll jump in. I'm amazed that you waited that long for your coffee, Hiro. That's incredible. So anybody in the audience, if you want to type in a question, we'll start fielding those in a minute. But why don't we start with, I'd like to pick up on the IXP that you lead to Japan. So you've been studying those long-term effects of crisis management following the earthquake and tsunami that devastated the Honshu region. I think there were, is it 9.0 on the Richter. There were over 16,000 deaths. There were hundreds of thousands of people who were displaced and hundreds of thousands of buildings that were damaged, including the Fukushima nuclear power facility, which was added to the devastation. So what can organizations today learn from that experience, apply to our current pandemic challenges? What kind of wisdom could be imparted from that experience?
Okay. Yeah. So I've been taking students to Tohoku, HBS students, 9 years in a row. So next year, it's in the J term. So I take them in the first 2 weeks in January. So next year, it's going to be our 10th anniversary. So the people in Tohoku are just absolutely amazed that 45 of us will come every year, 10 years in a row, right? 7,000 miles away to kind of help the community there. What the students do is work with organizations in the Tohoku area to restore the economy, to restore their business. And we've been doing that for the last 9 years. And next year is going to be our 10th anniversary. And so I think, the same kind of philosophy holds that we have in the book, the importance of the common good. What can we do for the common good? And in order to do that, we have to make here and now decisions. And so the students kind of work with different social entrepreneurs, different organizations, different companies to try to help them to deal with the complexity, to deal with the disaster, to deal with the uncertainty, and to rebuild the business. So the same kind of mindset, I think, can apply to the world right now, COVID-19, because think of it, right? We call it COVID-19, because it happened in 2019. But in 2019, you know, who could have predicted that a pandemic like this would disrupt our entire life like this? No one would have predicted. So go back to what Peter Drucker said: you cannot predict the future, but you can make the future. So I think it's the making the future part that's important. And I think what we need to do is, you know, on a worldwide basis, have everybody, you know, make a human chain, cooperate and see what we can do for the common good. So there's, I think, a very strong lesson that we can learn. And one of the reasons we're doing okay adapting to coronavirus is Japan is used to having crises like this. So it was 2011, we had the tsunami. Last year, we had the typhoon devastate, you know, part of places very close to Tokyo. So every 5-10 years, you know, we kind of deal with these kind of crises. And so, you know, when you ask the mission of a company, most CEOs in Japan will say, you know, what's your mission? They do not say maximize shareholder value. In Japanese, they will say yo no tame, hito no tame. And it literally translates to for the good of society, for the good of humans. Yo no tame, hito no tame. So why do we exist? You know, we exist for that. So the mission is very clear. And the vision is, you know, what kind of a future do we want to create? So they're constantly talking long term. So it took Honda 29 years to develop the HondaJet, right? So longevity, survival for the Japanese companies, that's kind of the goal. The goalpost is not to sell out and, you know, maximize shareholder value, is to create a better life, is to create a better society. So I think there's kind of a very strong link to the fact that, you know, we had that crisis with 3/11, and now we're kind of better able to adapt. And that's what humans are good at. We have the uncanny ability to adapt to change. Let me stop there.
We have another question about Uniqlo, and I know you've been involved with them. How where do you see them fitting in the wisdom creation cycle?
Uniqlo is an upcoming firm. He, you know, has been CEO for like 40 years. He's trying to pass the baton to the next generation. But Uniqlo, I think, is seen more in the league of yo no tame, hito no tame companies, because, you know, for one thing, the reason I was with him is he created a scholarship for high school students in Japan who gets accepted to American universities, liberal arts colleges. And he designated about 35 of them, and, you know, Harvard is included, and so is UC Berkeley, my alma mater. But it doesn't have to be the big ones, the famous ones. You know, small liberal arts universities are fine. So so for the last 4 years, on average, he's given out 30 scholarships to 30 students. And each scholarship is $70,000 a year times 4, so $280,000. And he, like me, don't believe in the higher education system in Japan. He's a graduate of Waseda University, which is a good university. but he thinks it's a lot better for youngsters in Japan to go to study in the United States. And he added the UK starting last year. And so he's seeing the future of Japan and saying the future is going to belong to the, basically he says two types of people, youngsters and women. And so he says, I'm going to put my money to these individuals. And, you know, that's kind of the mindset he has. So with the current business, with the current crisis, you know, his sales are down by 30%. All the stores in Southeast Asia are closed. All the stores in the United States and in Europe are closed. But he says we can survive. We can still be giving out used clothes to refugees for the next 3 years. And, you know, and it's that kind of mindset that is respected here, thinking about the common good and making here and now decisions. So I did write about Mr. Yanai and Uniqlo in the Tohoku case series that I had. And what was very interesting is the students actually wrote the case. And my name's on it because you need a Harvard faculty to issue a case. But second line of the case, it says, Mr. Yanai was eating sushi on the day of the earthquake at 5:30 p.m. The earthquake hit at 2:46 p.m. Tsunami came 30 minutes later. But the case wrote, you know, he was eating sushi at his favorite sushi restaurant in Tokyo. And he basically says, I was able to do it because he has, you know, the store managers are in charge. And he has trained all the store managers to think like me. So leave it up to them. I can, you know, we can be on autopilot and they'll do the right thing. So, you know, that kind of, what was interesting is the legal department wanted me to erase that, that line because it could be misinterpreted. But he says, hey, what's wrong with that? That's reality, right? So put it in. But we did erase the third line, which says the earthquake hit on a Friday. But he says, Mr. Yanai went to his favorite golf course the next morning, but nobody was there. We deleted that because that we thought maybe a little controversial. So let me stop there.
Yeah, yeah. So Hiro, we've got a couple of questions around maximizing shareholder value.
Okay.
John Carrier is one of our alums. He writes, you referenced Herbert Simon. Any thoughts on his concept of satisficing 20 plus years before Michael Jensen's maximizing shareholder value? And then added to that is, what's the conversation at HBS around maximizing, shifting away from maximizing shareholder value?
Yeah, quite a bit of shift since I think. We don't deny that should be one of the goals because one of the stakeholders is the shareholder for sure. But you know, let's don't forget employees are also a stakeholder, customers, society at large, and we in our new article say the future is also a stakeholder. So you know, we have no problem with having maximizing shareholder value as satisfying one of the stakeholders, but we also have to kind of satisfy other stakeholders. And I think, you know, the Business Roundtable issued a statement last, was it August, right? Saying shareholder is not everything, right? So, you know, there were 181 CEOs of, you know, companies like Amazon, like Apple, who signed the declaration. So there is kind of a movement in saying, let's not only talk about maximizing shareholder value. Nitin clearly, by coming out with the statement from knowing to doing to being, right? He kind of made a big shift in thinking about what's the mission of the companies. I mean, the mission of HBS students is very clear, right? Make a difference in the world. So we're educating students who would make a difference in the world. And I think, what I'm seeing is a lot of the students now are going to work for companies that only employ one Harvard MBA. And those are mostly startup companies, right? And many of them are social entrepreneurs. So we've kind of shifted from, in early days when I first taught, 76 to 83, they were, the students were trying to work for large companies. But now 70% of our students are getting employed by companies that only employ one Harvard MBA. So yeah, these are the changing times, I think. And Herbert Simon, hallelujah to him. He's sort of the one who talked about the bounded rationality, and he created a computer model where he saw the company as an information processing machine, and his thoughts, I think, are still dear to us. Let me stop there.
There's another question from Ron Chandler, who's the CIO at HBS, and he says, Ron, yeah. So he says, thank you for spending time with us. I'm sure you're familiar with Peter Sengi's work and the Learning Organization. He speaks of the importance of personal mastery and mental models, among other things. How do you reconcile the hero mindset, that's H-E-R-O, mindset, versus high-performing teams to achieve overall organizational success?
Yeah, we did quote Peter Senge quite a bit in the first book, 24 years ago. So our thinking with the 5 principles very similar in our thinking, but I think our thinking is much more idealistic in a sense. We kind of put humans at the center of our thinking, and humans, are not that mechanical in a sense, where we do have the analytical capabilities, but we're kind of subjective creatures. We imagine things. So I think in terms of the new book, we put quite a bit of emphasis on being agile. We use the Scrum approach that Jeff Sutherland has come up with. In fact, Jeff Sutherland calls us the grandfather of agile. And we kind of asked him, why grandfather? We're younger than you, Jeff. But his response was, I'm the father of the agile movement, but I learned a metaphor from your 1986 article in the Harvard Business Review on the new product development. And he says, I learned Scrum, which is, we used a rugby metaphor for product development using rugby. It's better than having the phased program process, the relay race that used to be the norm back then, into kind of the mixed up rugby format. It creates better products. It also reduces time. So, we use Scrum as our metaphor. So he basically said, I learned Scrum from you, so you're the grandfather of Scrum. So in terms of, it's very similar to design thinking. So there's some commonality there with Peter Senge, but I think it's more the human team process that's kind of agile that we emphasize more recently. Let me stop there.
There's another question from Helen Silverman, and she asks, how do you keep the idea of longevity while still pursuing innovation? Do you think one tends to get sacrificed for the other?
Okay, that's a great question. When you look at a company like Honda, you know, it's been around 75 years, but for 70 years, they were thinking about human mobility. And so, yeah, motorcycle helps human mobility, but for executives, you know, jets are helpful. So the key word that we use in the new book is, the subtitle is How Companies Create Continuous Innovation. So the key word is continuous. So how do you kind of, you know, it takes years. It took Honda 29 years to come up with the product. So we're also in the new article writing about Fujifilm, which is going to be creating this, hopefully, this medicine that could fight COVID-19. But, you know, they started out being a film company, but they're kind of into medicine right now, not because, you know, they want to diversify, but I think as a natural evolution, they went from a film and into medicine, and hopefully this medicine could help with the virus right now. But we think this kind of continuous innovation, it's not the PE, the private equity mindset of sell out after 7 years, or, you know, Silicon Valley, you know, sell out after, you know, you reach a certain valuation. It's sort of keeping inside the company, but taking the tons of years to come up with continuous innovation. So the key word in our new book is continuous innovation.
Yeah. There's another question on Honda, which you've already talked to us about a bit, and it's this from Parker Symes, and he said, firms such as Honda are manufacturing firms, and they generally can't easily apply teleworking methods on the factory floor. What creative methods of coping are these wise companies beginning to employ in the current pandemic? So what's going on at Honda now, do you know?
Okay, I live about 5 minutes away from the Honda headquarters, and their headquarters is closed. So everybody's kind of doing teleworking, you know, for sure. But what's interesting about Honda, two things are interesting. They have this thing called Waigaya, and it's an onomatopoeia for Wai Gaya Gaya, where people kind of come together over drinks, and they do it over 3 days, and they basically spill their guts in these meetings. So in addition to teleworking, which they're right now, they're saying hopefully the day will come when we can get back to normal. The new normal is teleworking, but the normal is over 3 days at a hotel or a ryokan somewhere on a tatami floor. We'll drink sake and we'll spill our guts. The first thing they start doing is, you know, I don't like my boss, let me tell you why, kind of thing. And over 3 days, they will, you know, talk whatever is in their guts. So they kind of have this both and thing. So they have, on the one hand, the digital format, but they also have this analog format. And that, I think, is doing both at the same time is important. And in fact, Inamori, who resurrected Japan Airlines 7 years ago, used a thing called kompa, which is a drinking session, which he copied from the Waigaya concept at Honda. And they basically bring people together, pay 100 yen, drink beer, and spill your guts kind of thing. So that part is still very active. The other thing about Honda, let me just mention, is people in Honda, when they reach the executive level, are dying to retire. The reason being at the Honda headquarters, right close to where I am, right? Everybody is in one large room. All the executives are in one large room. But when they retire, they go to an office near Tokyo Station where they will have their personal secretary. They will have assistance in terms of a limo. And so they have all the amenities they could think of that, normal for American CEOs, but they don't have that in the Honda headquarters here. So what's interesting is they want to retire as quickly as possible because life is better at Tokyo Station than in Aoyama, which is their headquarters. Let me stop there.
That's amazing. Well, we're coming up onto our hour, Hiro. So I want to be very conscious. So I don't know if you're going to go back to bed or not, but I want to be conscious of your time. I remember when I was first introduced to our work by Professor Chun-Wei Chu at the University of Toronto. This was in the late 90s. And this whole field of knowledge management was just beginning to open up. And this was when we were at, it was called the Faculty of Information Studies. And we were exploring building a whole new curriculum to teach knowledge management. Chun-Wei was the faculty lead. Our then Dean Lynn Howarth was on the committee, and a doctoral student, Brian Detler, who's now a professor at McMaster University. And I think at least two of them are on the call. And we used to joke that as faculty of library science or information science, we'd gotten our arms around information or data management. We'd gotten our arms around information management, and now we were moving to knowledge management. We were moving up that information taxonomy. But we always joked, and as a group, we sometimes called ourselves the Four Musketeers. We always grouped that we would never move to wisdom management because we would need to be so much older and so much wiser. And so here we are 25 years later, maybe a little older, maybe a little wiser, but you have given us so much to think about.
Thank you.
Especially at this time when we need to make sense of what's going on in the world. We need to apply our wisdom to these challenges. So let's hope all of that practical wisdom that your book unlocks wins out, and that we are all able to contribute to making the future. It's just been
that's a great closing comment.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank Ashley Wheeler from HBS Marketing and Communication, and Dina Gerdeman and Mariah Tumbleson Shaw in Baker Library, who have made all of this magic work. And the last thing I would just like to mention that our last books at Baker for this fiscal year is coming up in June. We don't quite have a date settled for it, but have a watch for that. It's going to be John Macomber from the finance unit and his co-author Joe Allen from the Kennedy School, a brand new book. I think it's just out this week, called Healthy Buildings: How Indoor Spaces Drive Performance and Productivity. So another timely topic. So again, Hiro, thank you for everything.
Thank you.
And I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone what Angela Crispy, our executive dean, ends every meeting with, is that don't forget to wash and practice social distancing so we can all come back to campus soon. So thank you again, Hiro. Thank you to all our participants. We look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye now.